Hello, audience. My name is Dalton Mortimer, and I am the Authenticator. And welcome to the A Mystics Vlogs Easter special. As per usual, I fucking love holidays. Especially because there's so much mysticism, mythology, and lore in general to go through. And where culture meets magic and lore, there you will find me waiting to make an episode. And in this case, there's plenty to get through. Unlike my other specials, though, simply by virtue of the lack of Easter-related material to get through, this one will be focused only on one normal episode length. But, fortunately, courtesy once again of the brilliant quasi-prophetic mind of Neil Gaiman, there's plenty to get through by virtue of American Gods, Season 1, Episode 8, Come to Jesus, which is quite, well, to put it mildly, it's kind of in name only, or at least where Jesus is concerned with in the context of this episode. There's a lot of pre-Christian or pre-Abrahamic Schadenfreude to get through, and I, for obvious reasons, I'm going to be partaking quite heavily of it. So this is as good a time as any to point out once again, if you're looking for an Abrahamocentric perspective on these things, or a reinterpretation of this lore, you're not going to get it here. I go where the anthropology points me, and where the history points me, and in that case, it's very rarely ever to an Abrahamic faith. They tend to pilfer a lot. Not that that's a bad thing, or I'm not passing judgment on that, but I go where the historical record points me, and where the historical record is pointing me is once again to pre-Abrahamic traditions and time periods, which is all the better because it's something I'm more inclined to talk about. Not that I'm opposed to any kind of Abrahamic mysticism. I mean, for fuck's sake, Gnosticism is great, as is the traditionalist Martinist order, as is Kabbalah, as is the Islamic version of sorcery, which I can't think of the name of right now, but those are tasks for another day. When it comes to Easter lore, we have to go back as far as we can, and on that note, in we go, once again. Happy Easter, folks! We open, and I guess to start off with, I better do some work explaining and summarizing how we get from point A to point B with American Gods, considering this is a video covering the technical finale of Season 1 of said series. For the overall sort of impetus behind American Gods, you can go and watch my American Gods overview video, which you can find on this channel. I think it was A Mystics Vlogs 13, I believe. But anyway, the impetus behind this particular episode is Shadow and Mr. Wednesday, aka Odin, who I will be referring to him as from here on, because not that I don't like Mr. Wednesday, but I prefer to just get right to the point, and he's Odin. And more importantly, this is the episode in which we find out that he is Odin, in quite a spectacular scene, if I do say so myself. But that's neither here nor there. Anyway, in their war against the new gods, Shadow and Mr. Wednesday find that they need a heavy hitter. And the way they phrase it in the episode is they are in need of a queen. Where Freya is during this whole, where Freya or Freya is during this whole, shenanigans, who is actually Odin's queen in his own pantheon, I don't know, I don't think she could be reached for comment, although it'd be hilarious to see her come in with, like, a rolling pin and, like, slap him upside the head like he's Eustace Bag from Courage, but that, thing for another season, I guess. Assuming they ever put it in. It'd be fucking hilarious, though. Anyway, they need a queen, and given that spring is on the horizon, they end up seeking out the goddess of spring in the Germanic pantheon, who is Ostara. And on that note, let's fill in some of the gaps there, shall we? Because I'm sure that that portion of that sentence did send quite a few of you into scratching your head in derision mode. So I will attempt to resolve this post haste, shall I? If you've watched many of my holiday episodes, you probably know something resembling the drill by now. Basically, in pre-Abrahamic times and cultures, uh, there was a veneration of natural forces and the cycles thereof and the energies associated with those cycles. And in the case of Easter, the origin of most of the traditions that we associate Easter with, i.e., the eggs, the bunnies, the veneration of various spring iconography, chocolate candy, baskets, etc., are all derived from the pre-Abrahamic festivals that celebrated the beginning of spring. Much in the same way as Samhain and Yule were to celebrate the darker primal aspects of human nature and nature itself, and the sort of wholesome innate spark of nature, respectively. This particular festival was, of course, about the energies that had been ebbing during those periods are now flowing again, and therefore will be revitalizing all of nature, which for a, agrarian agricultural society, or the various offshoots thereof, was a very important thing. Essentially, if Christmas and Halloween are about taking advantage of those energies ebbing and seceding, this is a woo, we made it through, all those energies are flowing again, and now we can take advantage of the revitalizing capabilities thereof festival. As for the Easter iconography, the egg is symbolic of creation and rebirth, because of course, that's what eggs do, they're for creation and rebirth. Rabbits, of course, being, as the expression breeding like rabbits is a thing, symbolize both fertility and vitality, because bunnies are full of energy, and therefore the thought was, if you could harness some of that energy, you would also gain some of that vitality. Hence the constant asphyxiation with rabbits. Although if the fertility thing bothers you, I will point out that when they say vitality, they also mean like creative and generative vitality, so it doesn't have to be sexual if there are any prudes in my audience. Although if there are any prudes in my audience, what the fuck are you doing here? And I apologize for all the times when you surely must have been triggered by now. Because, well, let's face it, I have no shame, and I don't expect many people in my audience do either, so there's that. But anyway, yes, basically the purpose of Easter, or Ulster as it was originally called, had to do with utilizing the new flow of the energies that were ebbing during the cold and dark seasons of nature. As to why it is called Easter or Ulster, that relates to a goddess who is very similar to Demeter in the Greek pantheon, and also Diana in the Greek pantheon, or Artemis. Those three gods are probably the closest you can come when it comes to Easter. But her name in Old German was Ostara, and the festival which was associated with her that always took place at the beginning of spring, which was meant to sort of not only take advantage of the newly thriving energies, but also to kind of spur them into greatness. Like, not only was it to take advantage, but it was also to sort of poke the fire a little bit so that it grew more. So that not only was it the same as it was when it stopped, but also hopefully better. Anyway, yeah, her name was Ostara, and her festival was Ulster, which, when it became Francicized and then eventually Anglicized by the Franks, the Gauls, and eventually the Britons, it became Easter. As to how Jesus fits into all of this, because, like I said, if you've been paying attention to my holiday episodes, you probably know the rough gist of it. Basically, the pre-Abrahamic cultures had this festival of birth and rejuvenation, and taking advantage of nature thriving again. And when the Roman Empire converted to Christianity and began to enforce Christianity among its various colonies, they told them to stop celebrating it. The people who enjoyed celebrating it told them to go fuck themselves in no uncertain terms. And because this was the Gauls and Scots, you can imagine the warlike reaction that had. And eventually, the higher-ups in the Christian hierarchy were basically like, okay, we don't have a day set on the calendar for when Jesus is said to have resurrected, and this festival is about rebirth, rejuvenation, and taking advantage of newly thriving energies, so why don't we take some of the iconography for ourselves, say that this was the day that Jesus got resurrected, and then people can continue celebrating the thing they were always celebrating, but under the guise of being good Christians while doing it. Because it's easier than fighting them. Because people don't like giving up their fucking holidays. I don't know how many times they must have had to learn this lesson, because they did the exact same thing with Halloween and Christmas too, so it's like, how many times do you think this happened the first time they did it? Like, okay, so you can't celebrate Halloween. Well, we're not going to stop celebrating it, so you need to come up with a better reason. Okay, so it's now All Saints' Day. And you need to stop celebrating Yule, too. Well, we're not going to do that, because we need to do that for like, natural cycles and things. Okay, well, for official record, it's now the day that Jesus was born. Yay. And then they tried it again with Easter, and it was like, oh, okay, fuck. It's now the day that Jesus was resurrected, so we can take advantage of all that rebirth and rejuvenation iconography there. Yay. Yeah, but basically, most of the things you typically associate with an Easter basket are things that were previously offerings to various deities, be they nature spirits directly in the form of, like, once again, Fae, or in the form of higher goddesses and gods, like Cernunnos, Odin, and, of course, Ostara. As to the baskets, that relates to how you would offer a deity something. You would essentially find a grove or a sacred space in nature for them. You would leave your offerings in the basket and or share them with the people in your tribe, and it was thought that the deity in question would take the vital energy of the offering and leave the physical substance behind, and you could then take part in it. As to the whole sugar, sweets, and candy thing, that probably relates to small cakes and cookies that were made in these types of festivals. There was a lot of feasting and whatnot going on. Basically, ironically, most of what was originally the actual celebration of Easter sort of got shunted off into Mardi Gras, which, you know, feasting and taking advantage of nature's plenty, yada yada yada. That was a lot of what pre-Abrahamic festivals were. It was, this sucks and or this is back now, so let's feast and celebrate it so that we don't look ungrateful for the bounty that we have been given. Yay. So yeah, originally, Easter and Mardi Gras sort of commingled, because they were essentially the twin aspects of the same festivities, and then the Christians were like, well, our spirituality and our morality say that you should abstain from excess, so let's shunt everything that has to do with excess off into Mardi Gras, and then have a Lent period where everyone purifies themselves, and then if they still want to feast on Easter, they can do that because they've just denied themselves for a month and a half or so. Which is efficient, I guess, I'll give them that. But yeah, that's sort of the long and short of it in terms of Easter. Pagan festival, the Christians told them to knock it off. The pagans were like, fuck you, no. And the Christians were like, alright, we'll edit it so that it looks Christian on the surface. Yay. There's that. Anyway, back to the episode. They get to Astara's mansion, because she has one of those, because she's thriving off of all the people that tangentially celebrate Easter. Not that I can necessarily blame her. I mean, it's kind of interesting the way that would work. Like, no matter for what reason they think they're celebrating it, they're still doing all the things that she would have had them do in like the ancient times, and they're still calling it Easter, so she still gets the lion's share of it, or at least a large proportion of it. So she's doing fine. There's a scene where apparently Easter's guards are, or Ostada's guards are bunnies, and Odin straight up runs over them. And now we find the reason why I don't often pray to Nordic deities. Like, I believe you exist, but you're not worth worshipping as long as you're being warmongering fucks. And running over cute things is definitely a warmongering fuck move. So, yeah, no. No thanks, Allfather. Sorry. Despite the fact that Ian McShane, who plays Odin in American Gods, is fucking cool, and he does make me kind of have more respect for Odin than I previously did, still kind of a warmongering fuck, so yeah, no thanks. So anyway, interestingly, the way that Easter maintains her, or Ostada, I'm going to call her by her proper name because I feel sort of dirty when I don't. The way Ostada sort of solidifies her hold on the day that is known as Easter is by inviting all of the various manifestations of Jesus Christ to her Easter celebration and kind of sharing it with them, which I guess is the diplomatic way of going about it. One does have to wonder if the reason why Odin is so mad at the new gods for doing what they're doing is because he's already put up with this once before. Because, like, as much as we all hate to, like, look into that particular abyss, lest we forget that this is not the first time that a new spiritual zeitgeist has come through and tried to supplant things. Like, that was, again, a lot of what the Christians did. And I'm not even blaming Jesus for that, because, let's face it, most of the time in the actual Bible, Jesus was just cool with most things. Like, the dude got crucified and he was just like, no, forgive them because they don't know what they're doing. That's some like Zen hippie shit right there. So I don't blame him for the Crusades and the Inquisitions and the witch trials and the forced conversions, but let's not also forget that the Inquisitions and the Crusades and the witch trials and forced conversions did happen. So there's that. But anyway, she tries to peacefully share her day with them so that she gets to sort of remain relevant and remain in people's, remain at least subconsciously in people's minds. And Easter, being cool like that fits well with Jesus's I don't give a fuck, just generally be nice to people attitude. The interesting thing, again, with the American Gods is that it kind of operates by Maid to the Ascension rules, so it's basically reality by consensus, which would be perfect for SJWs, but that's neither here nor there. I do not want to live in a universe where they have the power of consensus. That would be terrible, by Maid to the Ascension rules, or Maid to the Awakening rules, anyway. Anyway, so, because it operates by Maid to the Ascension, gods become manifested when people believe in them rules, there are multiple iterations of Jesus's, which I kind of like. I like that even though Christianity and Abrahamic religions are on paper monotheistic, by virtue of the simple ways that divergent people worship, you're going to end up with basically polytheism anyway. So what you get is multiple versions of Jesus. There's a white all-American Jesus. There's a black sort of gospel-loving Jesus. There's a Greek Orthodox Jesus who's very swarthy in Greek. There's a baby Jesus that's constantly being suckled by some iteration of the Virgin Mary, and so on and so on and so on. And I kind of like that. Because it's just like, well, even if you believe there's only one God, you're going to have divergent definitions of this one God, and it's possible you might just land on polytheism anyway. But anyway, Odin comes in there, and he sort of makes a similar argument to the one I would make, fair enough, and it's quite cathartic for me personally, because Odin just lays into the whole Jesus kind of hijacked this entire thing, and all of the like rituals and stuff are still Easter or Ostara related, and not Jesus related, but he still gets like the prayers and the credit and shit. Although, side note, I don't know why gods in American gods are so hung up on prayers, because in my opinion, like, prayers are the laziest form of spirituality. It's basically just sending the energy of a single thought or a single request every time you do it. So, wouldn't a more complex ritual, like, for example, the things we do around holidays, be more potent anyway? So, by rights, shouldn't Easter have more of the lion's share of this? Because it's still in her name, and it's still her traditions being used, and there's more energy of belief being sort of siphoned into those rituals than there is in the passive prayer thing. Um, maybe I'm overthinking it, but that's just my thinking. Um, Easter kind of gets upset with Odin because she's kind of resigned herself to that this is the way things are, and she doesn't mind sharing, which I suppose is nice, but I would once again be with Odin on this. Like, why are you letting them walk all over you? Why are you letting them use your traditions? Like, it's you that people are actually putting the energy into, so why aren't you, like, taking point? Um, and I get that she's kind of being non-confrontational, and that's nice and wonderful and everything, but still, like, the fuck. Anyway, so there's that portion of the episode, and she eventually gets convinced by Odin to kind of join the old gods' crusade, and then the new gods show up, and whoo boy is it a doozy of a scene. It is one heck of a doozy of a scene, that's for sure. But anyway, let's get into that portion, shall we? Because that also has some interesting elements to it that I probably should go through. So back in we go again. But before we get too far stuck into that, before we address the new gods on the block, as it were, can we just talk about Odin's actual plan? Because I has questions. I have many questions. Okay, so the long and the short of it is Odin wants Astara to withhold the spring from America, i.e., to completely reabsorb all the vital energy she's already sent out and basically make all the crops fail because nothing is growing. Um, and he says that this will result in them praying to her and thus worshipping her again, and she'll regain her status as a full force in the world, and so on and so forth. Which we'll get into more of that in a second once we touch on the new gods again. But several things, and they sort of bring this up and then lampshade it. If there was a drought on Easter, most people, regardless of whether they know the history of Easter or not, are going to pray to Jesus. And even if she waits until after her day is over and takes it then, I'm sorry, but something because God did it has not been a sufficient argument for a very long time, at least in the mind of most of Western culture. And even the people that would accept something because God did it as an explanation would probably look not towards an ancient nature deity that very few people have ever actually even heard of, aside from her tangential relationship to Easter. They would look to the Abrahamic God, and by extension probably Jesus for most Christians. So there's part one of why that doesn't work. Part two is, even if they could convince people that it didn't have anything to do with Jesus, and so on and so forth, there are a lot of goddesses of nature. Let's be fair. Like, there's Gaia, there's Demeter, there's Artemis, there's Diana. I went through a short list earlier, but I'm sure you can think of other ones. There's just the Americanized Mother Nature archetype, which, yeah, I guess you could argue is a modern, updated version of Gaia still, and so on and so on. So, how are you going to exactly guarantee that the lion's share of this worship goes to Astara anyway. And how is she going to end up getting more mojo out of this than if she had just kind of passively sat back, leeching off the mojo of Easter itself? So I'm just... Maybe you could make the argument that any, like, feminine archetype that gets prayed to on her day or in relationship to her festival goes to her anyway, because she's the one that did it and so on. And I guess if you could get people to believe in Mother Nature, and it was during her time period, that would go to her, maybe, kinda, sorta. But there is also the other issue, and here's where I don't get why the new gods are so concerned by this, because it took me all of 5 seconds upon my first watching of this to think of a way that they can utterly handicap this entire power grab of Ostara's and Odin's. 2 words. Global warming. No, I'm serious. Think about it. These are the deities of secularity, as it were. One is the embodiment of globalization and globalism. That's Mr. World. One is the goddess of media and, like, consumer culture in, like, advertising. And one is the god of technology and circuitry. So they can thrive whether people believe in deity or not. So why even let the notion of this being divine intervention anywhere near this incident? If they are successful with this, and she is, fair enough, to a star's credit, and it's awesome. If they are successful with this, wouldn't it make more sense to just chalk it up to a drought caused by global warming, especially considering that global warming is probably Mr. World's, like, pet project anyway, as a like narrative. I can imagine him coming up with it just for the sake of making people more globally conscious, which, given that he's the god of globalization and globalism, really, really oomps up his power base. So there's that. So I'm very, very confused. There's about 3 layers of not work in this plan of yours, Allfather, and I don't understand why everyone's reacting like it's a big deal anyway. But yeah, there's that. And so anyway, enter media, because of course, as you might imagine, in addition to her various congresses with the Jezi, or Jesuses, or Jesus? It's something. Plural, the plural of Jesuses, or the plural of Jesus. Ostara also has a long-standing arrangement with media, who essentially foots the bill for all of the advertising and the candies and so on and so forth, and presumably all of the History Channel specials that actually elucidate the connections to Easter, therefore keeping her kind of in the loop. The connections between Christian conceptions of Easter and the pre-Abrahamic conception of Easter, which essentially works to keep her in the loop. And so media shows up because apparently they have a long-standing arrangement in the form of Judy Garland's famous iteration of the Easter parade that she hosted with Fred Astaire. And Julian Anderson kills it as media, once again. Her uncanny impression of Judy Garland is amazing, and I love it. But, yeah, they have a long-standing arrangement which media describes in the style of Judy Garland as a marshmallow peep show, with cream eggs, bunnies, and duckies. And she and Ostara basically go off and do the whole polite socialite upper class thing, which I thought was nice, because, of course, if gods are anything, they are upper class, so that makes kind of sense. And given how sort of plastic and decorum-based media is, because this is old media, and not the as yet to be introduced in this show goddess of new media, who, as you can imagine, gives many, many orders of magnitude fewer fucks. She's all media as she currently stands is all about the decorum, so they go off and do their thing, and media describes them as, quote, a couple of swells. And if nothing else, this reminds me how much I miss, like, old style slang and language. Like, what happened to language, man? Language has degraded massively over the last, like, 30 or 40 years. I miss the sort of anachronistic 50s slang. But regardless. Um, so, media inquires as to what quote-unquote Wednesday was doing there, and this is the first sort of moment where you find out that Ostara is kind of on their side because she lies. She says that she dismissed him before hearing him out because she's doing peachy, which Ostara is using as a means to fill out feel out media's sort of position on things. Eventually, media comes to the realization that Ostara is unhappy with their arrangement, and she inquires about it, and Ostara says she feels, quote, misrepresented in the media, which I can imagine is particularly insulting, given that the embodiment of media is literally standing in front of you. And here is where the new gods fuck everything up for themselves, because, like I said, there was no reason this couldn't have worked in their favor. But this is where they completely fuck everything up, because instead of doing the rational thing, which is make a deal with Ostara to put more of the focus on her and take it a little bit off of the religious angle, which I can't imagine that the new gods have that much of a problem with. Mia says, and I quote, "Bear down on that feeling and press until it stops kicking," unquote. Media, you stupid bitch. I don't know what you're fucking playing at, my darling. All Ostara was asking was a little bit more focus on, the importance of her traditions, which you can spin secular if you want. I mean, that's your whole thing. You take old gods and you spin them secular till they become part of the culture, and then you sort of spin off the split there. And that's fine. That's perfectly reasonable. And would it have killed you to make another History Channel special about the origins of Easter? Really? I don't think it would have. I think you're just being a petty bitch. And on the surface, this genuinely confused me for a good long while until I remembered this is media. As in, if there was ever a living embodiment of the MSM, she's standing right there in front of everybody. So that would explain the kind of irrational devotion that media has to Christianity. Like, she literally starts white knighting for Christianity by saying that the only reason Easter is relevant today is because it's been adopted as a Christian holiday. Which, side note, media, you may bite me on in every conceivable hole with that fucking bullshit. If it was so unimportant to everybody, they wouldn't have stolen it in the first place. If the Christians could have just waltzed in and told everybody to stop celebrating their holidays, and they did it, we wouldn't be having this conversation in the first place. But we are, which demonstrates that there's something, at least innate to the human psychology, that requires these kind of festivities. But that's my soapbox out of the way. And actually need to clear my throat because I'm not feeling the best today, but it's 2 weeks after I started recording this as of recording this particular section, so this special needs to come out and I need to refocus on other things, specifically the 3 Legend episodes that I'm behind on, but regardless. So yeah, media goes on in quite a fantastic speech, which, I mean, she is the goddess of media, so I guess playing up things like that is kind of her thing. And I'm going to go through the entire exchange here because it's, for one thing, it comes back later in one of the best moments of the episode, but also because it's a genuinely great piece of dialogue. But we are kind of entering the home stretch here. The last 10 minutes of this hour-long episode are about to be addressed. And my word, is every instant of this 10 minutes gold, because it's one of the greatest, 10-minute sections of TV I think I've ever seen, and certainly the best, scene of American Gods thus far. And this is me after having watched the entirety of Season 2. But regardless, quote Astara, "Look at you, squawk, squawk." Quote Media, "In your Easter bonnet with all the frills upon it, you should be thrilled that anyone believes in anything that doesn't have a screen anymore. What happens if they all decide that God doesn't exist?" Quote Odin, who is at this point joined this little meeting and has descended from Astara's mansion. "What happens if they decide that God does exist?" Media's response, "Who's God? They're not all going to choose just one." Odin's response, "It doesn't matter. Plenty of worship to go around once worship gets redistributed." And this is what really cukes Media off. "We are the distributors, the platform, and the delivery mechanism. We control the story, we control the flow." Which, side note, really is reminiscent for me of how Patreon treated Sargon. So, in the American Gods context, I'm going to play up the fact that it was you, wasn't it, Media, who wrote that little snidely whiplash bullshit that Patreon pulled on Sargon, isn't it? But anyway, at this point, Mr. World and Technical Boy join the fray, and they start having a sort of dueling factionist ideology thing. And Odin says something that I think is really worth quoting again. So, to quote Odin, "Why do things happen? You want to know why things happen? Because gods make them happen. You want to know how good things happen? Be good to your god. You give a little, you get a little. The simplicity of that bargain has always been appealing. That's exactly why you're here, and that's exactly why I matter." I don't know if I personally necessarily agree with Odin on that, but it's certainly a worthwhile quote, especially when you consider the nature of the new gods. And on that note, we move into one of the most inspiring bits, where Astara, having enough of this slight, after Odin reveals himself to Shadow, of course, and is inspired to take action, moves to take Spring away. And the new gods look at her very incredulously, as though they're wondering what could she possibly do, which lends credence to my theory of, even though the new gods offer the old ones that they reboot a lot of surface level power, i.e., turning Vulcan, who was once the god of volcanoes, and metallurgy into the god of firearms, or turning facilitating the transition from Astara to Easter, they actually take more than they end up giving. It's the same principle as the demons in Supernatural. As we discover at one point in Supernatural, the soul is basically a almost inexhaustible form of energy that will let you do all kinds of mystical things. What demons do is they take the soul and they offer fast, flashy, convenient power for the short term, even though the person in question probably could have managed more than that in the long term if they just learned how to use and develop their soul properly. I think the same is true to some extent with the new gods here. Sure, Easter is a massive phenomena, and it's very powerful, and it's very, there's a lot of fast power to be gained, but when you consider that before she was Easter, Astara was the goddess of not only spring, but the dawn, That's a lot of power to lose. Sure, firearms are powerful, but given that Vulcan used to be fed by a force of nature, that being volcanoes, is it really a whole lot? I would say no. Anyway, Ostara takes the spring, and incidentally, she also knocks Media's Easter bonnet off, which I thought was hilarious because she made such a big deal about the Easter bonnet in the previous thing that I quoted. That in my head, I saw that as oh, you want to make a big deal about this? Well, I revoke your rights to this. This is mine now. Ha. Um, and Ostara becomes much freer and much healthier looking, even though she looks less plastically pretty. And so we come to the end of the episode. And Odin, unsurprisingly, kind of gets the last word here. He turns to Media and he says a truly badass line, but one I have issues with, which we'll get into in a second. He turns to her and he says, "Tell the believers, and the non-believers, tell them we've taken the spring. They can have it back when they pray for it." Now on to my two main issues with this, because as badass as that line is, and as much as it made me want to cheer for Odin at one point, after I thought about it for 2 seconds, I had issues. The first being, if you tell the non-believers about this, they're going to tell them in the means of global warming, and then you're not going to get any of the prayer juice from it, and Star's going to be really pissed at you for alienating her from the new gods, where she was getting most of her juice for the past century or so, and also not delivering any of the old worshippers back. So, whoops, Odin, you kind of miscalculated there, and I can't get over how much you've miscalculated there. But also, you don't get worshippers out of fear, at least not from the likes of me. Fuck off. You don't get things by taking things away from me. If you want me to do something, if you want me to respect you, if you want me to worship you, give me something worthwhile. If you want my respect, then you have to earn it. And I'm sick to death of people of all stripes, creeds, and colors not coming to this realization. Just because something is a god doesn't mean it innately deserves your respect. You should hold every kind of being to similar standards in this regard. If you want my respect, you should earn it, and I don't care if you're on this plane or some other plane, that's how that works. So yeah, as much as I'm cheering for you from a strategic perspective here, Odin, as a person who would theoretically be affected by this in this context, I hope the Dalton of the American Gods universe gave you a right and good middle finger and posted a version of this video where he yelled at you, and hopefully it got boosted up by Technical Boy for the fact that I was yelling at you, and they didn't pay any mind to the fact that I also told them off, because again, it doesn't matter what kind of being you are. You get held to the same standard regardless. It doesn't matter what plane you're from. The rules are the rules are the rules, because the rules are logical, not empirical. Empirical laws change with the wind, but logical laws are omniversal as far as we know. Deal with it. Sorry about the soapbox there, but this is a very philosophical show, and it hit one of my philosophical buttons. So, there. And clearly, if you watched this far into the video, you weren't offended by me telling off the Abrahamic phase, and you weren't offended by me taking the piss out of God's old, new, and Abrahamic through the majority of this episode, and focusing mainly on the verifiable logical traditions here. So, if you got offended by that last screed, evaluate yourself. I already have evaluated my position on this. That's why I came to such a concise position on this. Deal with it. But yeah, that's the end of the episode. And my god, do I love this episode. It's everything great about Neil Gaiman's writing style, and yes, I know he was only tangentially related to this show. And it's everything great about American Gods as a concept, and it's everything I would ever want in an Easter special, and it gave me so much material to go through, so yeah, thanks. All praise to Ostara, and I will see you all next time. Cheers, everyone!